I think I was upset. I felt attacked.
You felt attacked because I celebrated the fact that you had got your camera working.
You want me to pink you up? Brown you down? What you want?
Oh my god, stop being weird. Banana, make him stop.
When have I ever demonstrated the ability to make him stop?
Why didn't I ever have power? Yeah. Right, let's get started because I don't know how long this is going to survive. Also, I knocked my camera off my glass bottle and I had to put it back. So
yeah, I was going to say, is the glass bottle melting?
It's so hot.
Before we begin, the Gamer's Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Well, welcome yet to another Gamer's Advocate podcast. We are joined with AMKomnenos, BananaHammockRepublic, and myself, Legion. Oh boy, today we're going to be talking about a very important discussion, just like all of our topics are very important.
Oh yeah, that's all we talk about is important stuff.
But learning curves in games, and a lot of times when we talk about learning curves, you know, they can apply to your profession, they can apply to your hobbies. Gaming, I definitely think, is one of those that we take for granted on many occasions. And so when we are introduced to a game that has a tutorial, we can definitely sit there and say, wow, that tutorial was way too long, way too wordy. Other times we're like, there was a tutorial, I don't even remember it. You know, I remember for me, Cyberpunk, that's what I love saying when you finally get through that first prologue area. It's like, welcome to Cyberpunk, you finally finished the tutorial. It's not true, but it definitely has that feeling to it. And when it finally pops up after you've done the whole seems like an entire campaign, like almost chapter 1, but that's the prologue, which is really great. That really does set the scene because it does lock you in. It doesn't let you get outside of that area before you do that first story. But yeah, there's a lot of games that really kind of impress on you, whether or not you should do this, do that. Other games are say, you know what, you'll probably figure it out as you're doing certain things. And
it was funny because when you brought up Cyberpunk and that kind of tutorial sequence, you get the actual like tutorial in the chip that can't remember his name, doesn't survive.
Jackie
gives you that while you're sitting in the car, and you go through that like basic mechanics tutorial. And then you play through that prologue, and it feels like the prologue is like, okay, you know the mechanics, now here's how to apply them in the game. I think there are plenty of games that do that. And I was just thinking of Code Vein, because a friend and I are trying to start our co-op playthrough. And so she said I was able to skip the tutorial, and I was like, were you? Because immediately following the very basic mechanics tutorial is a tutorial sequence where you play through the game, and you have to play solo, and it kind of teaches you how to apply the mechanics that you were taught in that functional tutorial. And I think that's a pretty solid way to kind of convey to players how the game is going to work. Because a lot of us will see that tutorial, that initial functional tutorial, and be like, I'd prefer to just figure it out. Like I can understand pressing a button and then learning what happens when I press that button. So I don't need that kind of tutorial. And when it comes to things like RPGs, building out your character, choosing like a class, and then styling your character to suit a certain play style, that's something that I kind of think the fun of the game is figuring that out. So I don't need a heavily detailed tutorial with walls of text explaining to me, you know, the core mechanics of your game. But that follow-on sequence where it's like, all right, hey, everything's kind of scaled down a little bit, it's relatively easy compared to what the rest of the game is going to be. Just kind of get your bearings and figure out how this game is going to work for you. And then the game opens up and it would normally be tremendously overwhelming without that initial kind of, all right, you got this. Now let's get into the real game. I think that's a pretty solid way of doing it. That being said, I do love the idea of letting experienced players or players who are doing a second playthrough or something skip everything.
Yeah, I think the issue with learning curves is that, and tutorials in gaming, is it's a very, very awkward thing to actually do. It's actually not that easy. I think most tutorials aren't as useful as we'd like to think they are, unless you're really, really struggling with the basics of controlling a game, in which case they definitely have some value. Generally, tutorials are not a particularly useful way to learn how to play the games, because the very definition of gameplay is the emergent nature of it. It's the way that it's constantly changing. It's the way that it adapts to you. You're very rarely going to find yourself in more complicated games in exact situations the tutorials lay out for you. Oftentimes, the best thing you can do is just get out there and be introduced to mechanics slowly. So I think that's the way that generally you're going to find the best tutorials are done. It's games that let you slowly build up your understanding of the game through small and manageable bite-sized pieces, rather than tutorial hell. I think this is where a particularly bad example of them come in, which is the games, I can't remember the name of the studio, but it's the games Crusader Kings, Stellaris, Europa Universalis, those. Strategy games, I think, generally aren't that bad at this. For example, I think Civilization actually does them very well. And it's due to the very, very manageable start it gives you. Hi, have one settler, have one warrior, or whatever. If your faction has something special, maybe it's slightly different. But generally, it's just, you start with this and this. Good, you've got 2 things to do. And in 20 minutes, you might have 3. And in an hour, you might have 5. It's all very, very chunked in that way, introduced to new mechanics and new characters. You don't
and everything that you want is kind of tied to, like, okay, unlock this technology. And so you have like a path to move forward that's communicated to you one step at a time.
Absolutely. And that's the key part. It's the one step at a time. And the joy of games like your Europa Universalis or Hearts of Iron or any of those from that studio is that it doesn't do that in small steps. It gives you this big, wild world out there to play with, but if you don't understand what you're doing, you really can't play with it. So they're very, very tough games to start. And they all come with tutorials. And those tutorials are, with no exception, fucking awful. They are incredibly badly designed. It's just going to be 15-20 minutes of staring through the menus and being thrown information at you. And that's all they are. It doesn't work. A good tutorial, to my mind, is, let's pick one of these 2. Let's go with Shadow of War, the Lord of the Rings game. It starts you off with a very small amount of abilities. It sends you to a small contained area where you can fight a small group of enemies, which are all very, very similar. And you're going to beat them. Well done, you did great. And then we're going to take you somewhere else. We're not telling you it's a tutorial. We'll get introduced now. Maybe one of the enemies now has a bow. Oh, okay, so how are we going to respond to that? Next area, we're going to introduce you to the idea of traps. Good. But we're not telling you it's a tutorial. We're not doing that. We're just leading you step by step through this, and you're learning one thing at a time. And all those things that you learned in tutorial 1 are still relevant in tutorial 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. That's not the case in those Europa Universalis tutorials, where it's now we'll learn trade. Now we'll learn war. Now we'll learn whatever it might be. All of a sudden, I just think, hold on, we're in tutorial 4. What the fuck did I do in tutorial 1? How do I quick save again? Simple as that. These ideas just get forgotten, left behind. And it's a hard thing to do, to really create a good tutorial for your game. And I think it's going to be almost always easier to find bad examples of it. But a good tutorial for a game probably shouldn't feel like you're actually playing a tutorial. It should feel as though you're playing the game. And that's it.
It wasn't until we started discussing this that I realized there's already kind of a term in video game development for exactly what we're talking about. And it's the idea of conveyance. It's communicating to your players what they should be doing. And I think when we initially brought this topic up, I was trying to say that there is a difference between like communicating what your game is trying to accomplish and communicating how to be good at the game. And those are really challenging to balance, but I think we've kind of established a pretty solid strategy for communicating what your game is about. And it's this idea of building the early stages of your game to showcase the the core mechanics in a way that the player is going to use them, and then gradually building up the complexity by adding the next step onto whatever the previous mechanic was.
Weirdly, a game I think does a really, really good job of it is Half-Life. So I'm playing that for the first time currently. Oh, again, I'm playing Black Mesa, which is essentially Half-Life. And I don't think at any point it really gives you any tutorial. And there's definitely an assumption that you've played games before. So that is a weakness of it. There is this assumption that you know how to control things with the mouse and the keys. But beyond that, for the very game-specific stuff, it just plays. You just go into an area and you're introduced to one kind of enemy. You're shown the results of that enemy on other people. Good, not on me. Great. You learn what they are. You learn how to fight them. You pick up an appropriate weapon for them. You move on a bit further. Now this enemy, you see the effect it has on other people, and it becomes a new enemy. And you're shown a way to deal with them, and it just builds up over and over and over. And these enemies, again, keep showing up throughout the game. I haven't got, as far as I am in the game, about 7 or 8 hours in. So I think about halfway, maybe a little bit further. And I haven't got to a point where those first enemies are gone. You still find them. You still run into them. So you still get that little muscle memory feedback of, oh, it's those guys? Okay, 6 hits with the crowbar. Okay, oh, those ones, 5 hits with the crowbar. Oh, those ones, they still jump at me. So you still have this relation to what you learned earlier in the game. You're not forgetting things. And I'm at a point where I feel as though I really understand the game. And it was never a tutorial. It just really patiently introduced the mechanics and let me play with them all the way through without really ever leaving any behind either. I don't think that game has something where I've done it and then not done it again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, some titles are kind of locked behind their genre and how they do that. So action shooter, action RPG have the advantage of being able to show you versus just telling you. It's like there's an enemy there, there's a wrench, use left click to attack, and then that's it. And so it seems like it's seamless, but there actually is a tutorial, obviously. But the one you had mentioned before, they tend to take some of those old RTS campaign ideas of tutorials. Like, okay, so you're in this campaign, you're fighting a wizard now, and then the next thing you know, there's an elf with a higher level elf that has a different ability, and you're introduced into that naturally. So they're telling the story, but they're also, it's the campaign, so they're slowly increasing the difficulty and the strategy of what you're doing. And then when, of course, you're playing 1v1 or 2v2 or whatever you're doing, all those are unlocked for you, so that way you know how to address those. But then you have the pure story RPG, and I think those are the ones that do it really creatively. I had brought up Cyberpunk, but you take an example of like when you go to Vic, so you need an upgrade so that you can do your mission that you got this great opportunity to do. So you need an upgrade, and during that session they're talking about this, they're talking about that, they're talking about the story, and they integrate an increase, and now you're suddenly able to use that, and now you know what that does. They integrated the tutorial into the story pretty seamlessly. And so it doesn't seem like there's one there, but where you hadn't been using your optic options before, now you can.
Have you noticed that I'm occasionally teleporting? Kind of cool.
A little bit.
I love it.
I thought it was interesting you brought up those the strategy games, because I think we talked about this not long ago. I went back and replayed the StarCraft campaigns, StarCraft 1 and Brood War, and those tutorials are so overt. They are so hand-holdy. The first few missions, that first Terran campaign, are like, these are Marines. They are your combat unit. You're going to build a barracks, and that's how you get more Marines, because your starting ones, they're going to die. And I get it. I understand that, like, some people, and this is not meant to sound condescending at all, that some people will not have that experience with strategy games, and that will be tremendously beneficial for them to have that explicitly stated. But this is one of those things where, like, I think people who have played a lot of games over the course of their kind of gaming career will look at that and just go, God, does anybody really need this? Because we are so detached from what we were when we played our first game, that they might count that against the game as a whole. They might see that and just be like, oh, this is stupid. I don't want to sit through this tutorial. Just throw me in the deep end and let me sink or swim or whatever. And I disagree with that assessment, but I definitely get that feeling at times where I think some games can be too handholdy and a little too, they fail to respect the intelligence of their players a bit too much, and it leads to a kind of frustrating experience.
I think that's one of those things that we've talked about before, is the idea of people playing their first game, people playing their 100th game. And ultimately now we're going to be playing the same game. So let's say we decide 2 people to play StarCraft, to play Age of Empires or something like that, and maybe the other person's played Warcraft. And maybe they've played Red Alert, maybe they've played these games and one person hasn't. But we need to find a way to adapt to both of those people. And a forced tutorial, which takes place in this really slow, clumsy way, adapts to no one. Because if you know how to play the game, you just want the damn thing to be over. And if you don't, I always found that when you have those older games in particular, you'll have something like you said, all right, this is your soldier, now you gotta build a barracks, and we're gonna build that barracks because yada yada yada. I'm waiting for this whole goddamn text box to fucking read out. You're trying to drop sort of lore on me, and this idea of a campaign coming on, oh no, the enemies are over the hill, we need to build an archer. This kind of shit. You do that, if you've played these games, it's really fucking boring.
Yeah.
And if you haven't played these games, it's actually not that helpful because it's way too much crap being thrown at you as well. Yeah. When you just really all you need to know is more simply how the mechanic works.
Kill it with fire.
Yeah. This is a ranged unit. You want to use it to kill these things. And I feel as though we almost never, and I really mean almost never, find a tutorial that works for most people. They tend to be either a bit too advanced or way too easy for people. And I can't think of many games that really do a great job, but even the games I was coming up with as my examples of sort of good tutorials, the main ones I had were Shadow of War, which I thought was a very good one. I think XCOM does a very good job of introducing you to the game. I think Death Stranding does a very, very good job. None of them really are perfect. They all have their problems. XCOM, if you've never played that type of game, it's actually still going to be pretty hard. It doesn't communicate that well the very basic ideas. The way that tutorial works essentially is when you start, you fight one kind of alien, and then maybe you get 2 missions like that, or maybe just 1. And now we're going to introduce a second alien, so you start adapting to these kind of aliens who have slightly different mechanics, the psychic damage. Then we'll give you 2 or 3 missions with just those, and then we'll introduce a few more, and we go on like this, and after a while we've played 40, 50 missions, and now you have the whole gamut of alien experience. But if you just don't understand basically how these games work, none of that's that useful. You need a much more fundamental introduction to the tactical ideas behind it. It works really, really well for gamers. So I don't really know what the answer would be for how to make a good tutorial because it's so
specific.
And everyone learns a bit differently. I think for me, honestly, the best tutorial I could have for some of these games is the way I learned as a kid, which was with the great big manual. That's how I would probably prefer to learn these. That's got to be a minority view, I think. I don't think most people are going to want to play a game like that.
No, I still have my huge manuals just because they had lore in them. So I would read those, yeah.
Well, some of them did a really good job of introducing, it was something you could read on the bus home, is that first introduction to the game, and sometimes they did a very good job of combining a bit of world-building flavor and maybe a few mechanics in there. And then, of course, you had the really big manuals for strategy games, which were literally hundreds of pages long, and they weren't really doing any lore at all, outside of maybe some flavor text here and there. They were literally just explaining to you what units do, what all these things are. And I don't think many people read all of those. You probably read the first
that's exactly what I was
pages.
And nobody read them.
I read them. In fact, I got
nobody read them.
I got the ancillary books on top of it. So things like Morrowind, when Bethesda released the Morrowind Prophecies, they had their own little big thick volume, which I still have over here on the shelf. And it's presented like a story. Like, here's what's going on. Here's the story. Here's this character. Blah blah blah. And it's also giving you some tutorials and stuff at the same time within the book, within the guide.
That's a very different thing to what I would have meant. I'm talking about those much drier ones, which are more attributed to things like strategy games, where you would just go through and it was just numbers and detail, and it wasn't flavor text. It wasn't fun to read. It was more like an engineer's manual. It was more like a software engineering sort of requirements document than anything else.
But see, back then, of course, we had the box. It wasn't digital, so everything was box. So the things that came with it, I read everything. To me, it was a whole presentation. So I had the jewel case, I had all the little inserts, I had whatever game is coming out in the future, it would be a little flyer for that. I read the whole thing, including the tech stuff on it. That's just me. That was something I did. I will say though.
Oh no, you're right. That was just you.
Yeah. the Civilization games though, because I played a ton of the first 4 games, specifically 5 I did some. There's a lot of things that happen in the Civilization series that has changed so much, so it's hard for me to say this is how they did it in that game or this game. It's because some units aren't even in other iterations. So for instance, like the worker, they don't tell you anything, but the worker is something you use all the time in those early Civ games. And they actually had a hotkey that allowed you to specifically automatically upgrade roads. And that's what I wanted. I wanted my roads upgraded so that I could get commerce and or warfare or whatever, my troops moving faster. The people could move across faster for, future turns and whatnot. But they introduced the worker and the things that they could do, but not necessarily that specific thing. It was kind of like when you were in, I think it was like Control R, or Control G or H or something, and it would specifically focus only, instead of just automatic upgrades and look around and say, okay, let's assess and what would be the best for your play style or whatever you're trying to do in this map. You could say, I just specifically want to upgrade farms. I want to specifically upgrade roads, which is what I did. They don't tell you any of that stuff, but that's the difference with those Civilization games, those strategy games, is that they're kind of intended to be played over and over. So when people have a hard time they've said, I didn't really get into Civilization, I couldn't get it. I totally understand, because unless you're the kind of person that's going to want to dive a little bit deeper below the surface, it's probably not really for you. So
I think I'd probably disagree on Civilization. I think it's one of the set of strategy games that actually appeals to a much wider audience than that. There is the very surface level understanding that you can gain just by playing the game, and it's more than enough to get you all the way through to win games, probably even on higher difficulties, because the main thing that you'll find, in my experience I'm talking sort of Civ 2 through 4 here, so that's my main experience is CivNet and 2 through 4. Most of the hidden things, the extra information that the game offered you was automation processes. It was just ways to make your life a bit easier, to make the turns go by a bit quicker, so you didn't have to, like you say, tell every individual worker, okay, this turn we're going to go and do this, or wherever it might be. It was really just time savers. I think that's what made Civ quite unique in that regard, in a way that something like Crusader Kings isn't. Crusader Kings, it's almost impossible to play that game without having a much deeper understanding of the systems that are available to you. Whereas Civilization, you can pretty much play the whole game and do everything you ever want to do with just the simplest, keeping your hand off the keyboard, doing everything with just your 2 mouse buttons, the left click and the right click. And you play the whole game that way with just what's presented to you in the game. But for those people who do want to dive in further, there is then a whole world of things that you can actually do beyond that with, like you say, with keyboard shortcuts and with essentially building macros into the game just to save your energy and give you a chance to personalize the automation.
Yeah, one series that is totally different from that, though, is Anno. Anno is not forgiving. Anno is fun, but it is not forgiving. There's so many details. It's like games within games in that game. And it's one of those, like, if you love that type of civilization building culture, that's great. Because I think it's Anno 1600? The colonial one? It's really great. But then once you build your own little city, you realize you can build a whole trade network. You can build a city in another area.
This is Legion tying everything back to money again. This is not the first time that this has happened where we've discussed a game and you talk about the economy. And it's just like,
come on, Texas, tell us more.
Even when you finish, when you think you've learned the game, the game never tells you, oh, by the way, there's this whole other method of exploration and way of playing. It never really presents it. It just says, oh, here, hit it. You research a hot air balloon and suddenly there's a whole world in front of you and you don't know how to do any of this stuff.
Well, it's in the Hearts of Iron, Crusader Kings, Ouroboros Universalis family, which expects you to realize that when you're going to play this game, it expects you to know that you're going to have to read a manual. Okay, admittedly, they don't come with manuals generally nowadays, but the in-game documentation, wherever it might be, or you can have to go online and find people to teach you how to play. I think another game that has a very similar thing, and it's a weird one because I think it does do an okay job of introducing players to the game, but it doesn't do a great job of it, and it's very non-intuitive, is Monster Hunter. And this would go for pretty much all of those games. It's very playable if you decide to just pick up one weapon. You say, okay, forget this. I'm going to look at the difficulties. I'm going to see which weapon is technically the easiest to use. So I'm going to play Lance and Shield. Bam. I'm going to learn how to do 3 moves. You can probably play most of the game that way. And it does a fairly good job of making sure the enemies that you're meeting are relatively straightforward as you're playing the very, very beginning of the game. Particularly a game like World, which I played the most of. You can go and actually test yourself out on the small local enemies, then you can advance and do one of the smaller bosses. Maybe then you advance and fight one of the big bosses. There is this path. But most of what it does isn't really taught to you. You just figure it out. And you're only going to do that if you're A, a certain type of gamer, and B, with a certain type of gaming experience. If Monster Hunter is going to be one of your first games, it's an awful video game to start playing. You're never going to get a chance to get in and really enjoy it and love it. If Monster Hunter is your 50th game, you might have a good chance. If a Monster Hunter game is your second of the series because you've played World and now you're playing Rise or whatever the case may be, perfect. You probably know roughly what's going on. That's great. You learn the few new little things and that's it. But it's incredibly un-user-friendly. And the weird thing is, it looks like it would be a user-friendly game. Just when you look at the surface value presentation of it, you think, oh, look, this is cute. Look at all the food. Look at all of the fluffy monsters. Look at all of the little pal friends that we've got. Look how big everyone's smiles are. Look how happy everyone sounds all the damn time. I hate it. This...
You don't like Gemma? What?
It looks like it would be acceptable as like an early game for someone to play. It's really not. And on the other hand, I think Hollow Knight doesn't look welcoming, but would probably be a really, really good game for someone to learn gaming. And I wonder if that whole family of games actually might be. If Metroidvania-type games are great introductions to gaming. The relatively simple axis that you play on, just that sort of X and Y, the way that you unlock new areas, one ability at a time. The abilities tend to be very distinct and defined, and they've got these really clear, okay, this is for this feel to it. I wonder if maybe those are the perfect games to learn, and essentially the way that they function as tutorials to themselves.
Yeah, arcade games tend to lean into that because Ghosts and Goblins, one of the hardest games ever made on Battletoads, but it's very arcade. No, but no, there's nothing saying press A to jump or whatever. It's just, you just do it, you know.
Well, not forgetting on those arcade machines, the button was often labeled.
And this is going to be a painfully obvious statement to almost everyone listening, but like obviously the complexity of your game needs to be established in the tutorial and makes for a more complicated path to an effective tutorial. So if your game is jump and shoot man, like Mega Man, you can do a pretty effective tutorial in the opening sequences of that game. And then every time, the way Mega Man is structured, every time you get a new ability, there's this very like discrete jump in what you're capable of. So you have your base game, you master those mechanics, you get a new weapon. Now, how does this work? And then you have the entire period after fighting that boss before fighting the next one to learn how that weapon works. So it's very simple in how you would effectively communicate to a player how to play those games. And I realized as we were talking about this that I'm probably drawing a lot of my insight on this from a video I've already watched on this topic, which is the Sequelitis about Mega Man, which does talk about a lot of like how you communicate how to play a game to a player. And you don't need those archaic button map scenes that they used to show during loading scenes, which is like, all right, here's your controller. This button does jump. This button does change weapon, all of that stuff, because nobody retained any of that information the moment the loading screen disappeared. You're like, I remembered one button. I have to figure out the rest of them now. But I think that video was also made about primarily those more simple games. And when you get into a game like Civilization or one of the more complex RTS games, there's a lot of just general complexity in the gameplay of those. And those games get into a different area of this kind of learning curve discussion, which is, this is how you play the game against a computer. This is how you do the fundamental mechanics of the game. There's not really a tutorial on, this is how you play the game well. This is how you prioritize building up your army. This is how you handle a Zergling rush in StarCraft. That was never communicated in the tutorial. It was, here's the basic mechanics, you go figure out how to be good at the game. And I think that's an older mentality for game design. I think the idea of you go figure it out doesn't really exist as much as it used to. There are still games that do it. I think the Dark Souls series kind of leaned into that as, here's the bare bones mechanics, you figure it out. But those games felt more or less like a 3D Metroidvania style. Analyze the boss, respond to its movements, use the basic mechanics. That's your strategy. For more complex games, and one of the ones we talked about earlier was Dead by Daylight. Dead by Daylight gives you a tutorial of the very basic mechanics of that game and does not tell you how to get good at the game. Does not tell you the numerical calculations that are going on behind the scenes to dictate, oh, are you going to do a slow vault, a medium vault, or a fast vault when you're running at this gap? And then how do you start implementing those mind games into the chase? How do you convince a player that you're going one way and then duck behind cover, turn around without them noticing? That's all stuff you kind of figure out on your own, or you don't, and then you hate the game. And that's really where this learning curve discussion, I think, shines, is when you're taught the basic mechanics and you can't figure out how to get good at the game to the point that you just hate the game.
Yeah.
Well, I had mentioned before that the action games, the shooters, the RPGs tend to be able to lean into it a little bit easier without the pure tutorial, just because they're showing it, not.
Yeah. Also, single player games just in general should be better at this than multiplayer games.
Well, yeah, there's only so much we can prepare you for when it comes to a multiplayer game. Because not least, we don't know the way the player's going to play when we make the game. I'd imagine there's many game designers who created a game with this idea that it was going to be for online play, and then the way that people played it was just completely what they weren't expecting. A game I play quite a lot online is UFC 5, and honestly, there's a kind of a low-level meta to the game where there's a tactic that you can use which will work on most people who don't know the game that well, which is just walk right up to the face, lead hook, rear hook, lead hook, rear hook. And there's not really a response to it. And if someone does that to you and you don't know how to deal with it, it is the perfect tactic, because they will just hit you with that over and over and over and over and over and over. It doesn't drain stamina too much, drains your health like a motherfucker. But there is a response to it. Duck back, check uppercut, that's it. But if you don't know that, it's really awkward. You don't know what the hell to do in response to it. And I don't think the developers, when they made it, thought this is how everyone in that game until Division 13 is going to play. I think they must have thought people are going to be doing takedowns, they're going to be grappling, they're going to be doing submissions, they're going to be doing high-level kickboxing. No, hook, 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 hook. Yeah. And they had no way of knowing we were going to do that, so they can't even adapt us to it in tutorials or anything like that, because they don't know what the public is going to look like when we get our dirty hands on the game.
Yeah, this is very much the time to penis discussion. This is anticipating your players' behavior and how they are going to misuse your game. And that meta is almost the perfect representation of how players will deny the full complexity of your game and just pick on one simple sequence or mechanic and abuse the hell out of it until, like, you're not playing a game anymore.
I have played people in that game who they'll do the first one, you're trying to read it. It's like, okay, they've done the 4-hook thing. I know what they're doing. You let them get the 1 in, keep the guard up. Then the second time they go for it, you just duck, bam, uppercut. And it doesn't do a huge damage. It's just going to give them a light stagger, and it's going to stop them wanting to do that again. The amount of people who've quit as soon as you do that because they don't know another method.
Exactly it. Like, people go to the meta when the meta doesn't work. They're like, I hate this game. I don't know why.
And I guarantee you the person's face wasn't happy when they were doing it. You know?
Yeah.
And there's a reason, like, I've got private messages blocked on my PlayStation account because I don't know what they're currently rage typing. But this change between sort of single player and multiplayer gaming and how we can possibly prepare our players for the world that's out there. I think for multiplayer, to a degree, you just have to accept there's not a huge amount that you can do short of retroactively adapting a game as it's been out for weeks and weeks, maybe put in loading screen, someone hitting you with the hook spam, lean back and uppercut them. But that's so...
Yeah, and that also gets into balancing, which is another really, really tricky aspect of multiplayer gaming. But it is funny with those ideas of the meta, because I definitely remember playing the original Destiny, and I hated the meta. Because the meta basically ruled all of PvP. It was people running around with the same set of weapons and then just abusing them. And the whole point of Destiny is you get so many different guns and you can build your character so many different ways. And it just felt like the PvP missed the point entirely. And I was so stubborn that I would refuse to play with the meta. And I remember using a terrible weapon. Nice. For people who played Destiny, you may remember No Land Beyond, which was a bolt-action sniper rifle that you could equip in your primary slot. So it was a sniper rifle that you got ammo for every time you respawned in PvP. But it had iron sights, which is, in a game about future shooters, doesn't make any sense. It was a really bad weapon. If you missed, you went through the bolt-action reload, and you were super vulnerable that entire time. But I remember playing with that just as a fuck you to the meta. And I got okay with it to the point that I got a few of those hateful messages like, you're definitely cheating. And it's like, you are such a slave to the meta in this game that you can't accept the fact that there are other ways to play. And that's the issue with the meta.
And let me build on that, because I was recently having a conversation with a few friends and we were talking about maybe finding a little multiplayer game that we could all play together. We've tried some Dead by Daylight. We've tried some Repo. By the way, it's awful. Repo, it's terrible. This generation
that is
sort of
not an opinion of the entire podcast, just to be clear.
This little grouping and generation of low-quality multiplayer trash games that we play for 2 weeks. In all fairness, we played Repo for a bit longer. I'll give it that. But this Lethal Company, this... I've forgotten the name of the camera one. Fucking the headliners, Lockdown Protocol, Repo, they all feel the same. Don't play the same. They feel the same. It's vile. Anyway,
content warning. That was
maybe, yeah. To be clear,
no,
I
maybe
quite like Repo. Actually, quite like it. But
I definitely want to say I agree. I think this is a lot of those. I think low quality was kind of a fair way of putting it, because the game itself is not what makes it fun. It's the group you're playing with.
Yeah. And
we've gotten a ton of games like that where it's like, hey, here's the bare bones framework of a game. You make it fun. And then it becomes insanely popular for a few weeks because very fun people play it and people watch and they're like, oh, I want to have that kind of fun too. And then they play it for a few weeks and they're like, this is boring.
Yeah.
Let's move on. And then we get a new one.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that's fair, but I also don't.
But it's a bad experience. It is the time you spend with your friends, which is great, and there's value in them definitely. But it's just the way that it feels like there's a glut of them, and it always tends to be this 2-3 weeks maximum lifespan on them. So we were looking for a new one to play together, and we decided on Helldivers, which is a game I've been playing before as well. Banana plays. And I thought, yeah, that'd be fun. We'll try something sort of a bit higher quality, so to speak. It's something that probably has a bit more staying time, because it's always in development. It's being worked on by a studio who seems to care about it. It's constantly being updated and changing. And one of our friends, it was not in a bad way, but they were saying the problem is with Helldivers that they keep balancing it and nerfing all the powerful builds. And I was thinking, yes, they do. I love that.
I don't know if
that-
that's a problem.
Yeah. Give me this, because I love the idea that one of us runs around with an all shotgun build. I love the idea that someone else out there is carrying exclusively explosives. I love the idea that someone out there is carrying a heavy machine gun, a light machine gun, and a machine pistol. This is brilliant.
I think it's hilarious that the first one you went to was all shotguns, which is the one thing that Helldivers has never buffed into viability. Their shotguns are so poorly designed, they make no sense. Because like in every other game, your shotgun is good for two things. It is close range damage and armor penetration. And in Helldivers 2, there is no shotgun that has medium armor penetration, and they all do shit damage.
My build. Let's go. Hashtag the meta.
Yeah.
But this idea with Helldivers, and I think it's what makes it such a fun game in that regard, is it doesn't really have a meta build. There might be one, I don't know.
There was the railgun meta for a while, but yeah, the fact that the developers keep coming back to it to say, try something else is wonderful. I wholly endorse that. I love the fact that they're like, yeah, we put a bunch of shit in this game. Stop playing with just one gun.
And that's it. We've given you all these tools. Borderlands, I don't want you using 2 guns. I want you using 1,000 of them. It's that idea, isn't it? We've gone to the time and effort to give you all these tools. Have some fun with them. Just to pull us back onto the learning curve, because I did pull us away from it a little bit, and it's going to be back to single player. And it's a different aspect of learning curve. I think you also have to consider how a game teaches you how to play the game, mentally speaking. So I was thinking of 2 different games here. One is already mentioned. I've frozen, so let me just take a pause, get my camera back, and then I'll carry on from the same thought.
Yeah, Legion, do you want to just pretend like Tom is no longer on the podcast?
Before we begin, the Gamers Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, Banana and Legion. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to yet another episode of the Gamers Advocate podcast. We're joined with not AMKomnenos.
Today we'll be talking about XCOM.
XCOM.
No! No, not my thing. All right, I'm back. So, gonna carry on.
What were we talking about?
The mentality. I was going to talk about the mentality the games are teaching you.
Yes.
So a game has to teach you how to play the game in the sense of not the controls, but in the sense of the mindset you're supposed to have. And the 2 games I had in mind, the first one we have mentioned already is Death Stranding. I think when you are given the controls in Death Stranding, essentially all you get to do at the very beginning is you are told to walk from here to there. That's it.
Well, yeah, but that's the entire game, right?
It's establishing the exact tone of what you're going to be doing. Perfect. So it gives you the idea this game is going to be slow. There's not going to be a huge amount happening, but it sets you up with that right mindset, which I think is very important for a game. If you give us the wrong tone to begin with and all of a sudden we don't meet that tone later, it's a problem. The other game which I think does the best example of this, and it's a series, it's the Soulsborne series. You're going to die, and they let you know very, very early that's going to be the case, but also it doesn't really matter. It gives you a sense of how low stakes the idea of death is. And they all start, I think it's Dark Souls 1 starts off with the Asylum Demon, which is going to kill you very quickly, but you're going to start just outside where it was. Dark Souls 2 I haven't played, don't know. Dark Souls 3 starts you off with Irex Gundyr, and you have a bonfire just around the corner. Bloodborne starts you off with the werewolf, and actually that death is pretty much obligatory to get the story started. So, perfect, introduce you to the idea, and if you get past the werewolf, don't worry, there's the first group by the bonfire who are going to say hi later. Elden Ring introduces you to the Tree Sentinel directly outside, and the main area, which teaches you you're going to
You're
die.
skipping one in Elden Ring.
Very first death.
Yeah. Yeah, I cannot remember what the name of that enemy is
Some
right
kind
now.
of spider or something.
grafted scion.
Yeah.
All I could come up with Scion, and it was like, nope, there's more to it. It's not a car.
The grafted scion, there you go, which gives you that idea of, yeah, you're going to die. And again, like in Bloodborne, it's actually necessary to get the story started, because without that, you don't get to... Oh, well. If you do beat it, you die immediately after anyway. But without that first death, the story doesn't begin. So we're teaching the players not just how to play in terms of the buttons, but how to play in terms of what mindset should you have going into this game. What should you be trying to do? If our tutorial has you just about sneaking through situations, managing to survive, the game's telling you you're going to need to survive every situation you go into. I think it's something like Uncharted. You're not supposed to be dying in that. at the other hand, Dark Souls, you are very much supposed to die because that's how you learn how to dodge. The only way you're going to learn how late can I dodge that big attack is if you wait a little bit too long and get hit by it.
Dark Souls is the DBZ abridged of games. It's hit you until you learn to dodge. I feel like that should be a mod for every Dark Souls game. For every like powerful attack with one of those like weird timings where like you start panic rolling and then you're like, oh, well, I screwed it up already, need to continue panic rolling. Every time that lands, the game should just scream dodge at you.
I can remember the amount of times I fought Morgoth, Margit in Elden Ring, where he's got like these 7 or 8 hit combos, and you've slightly mistimed the first dodge, and you've just resigned yourself. Well, I'm getting hit with the next 8.
Yep. This is my life now. This is where I live. Every time you start panic rolling, that's exactly what it is, because there is no single panic roll in Dark Souls. At no point do you panic roll and then just like, okay, no, settle down.
I'm being silly.
Yes, it's very much panic roll, dead.
What it reminds me of the mentality is, if anyone has seen Parks and Recreation, there's a scene where Rob Lowe is looking into the mirror just saying, stop pooping.
Yes.
Just stop panic rolling. And you know every single time you push the button, bad, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this?
And the funny thing is, we're talking about this whole learning curve. Dark Souls immediately communicates to you that is not how to play the game. It punishes you for panic rolling every time, and we still don't fucking learn.
It's like 170 hours later, 6 players Dark Souls 3. Oh, baby, I love a panic.
But all of them have their roots in board games. And the board games themselves are interesting because if you look at the rules of, like, say, Monopoly, what makes Monopoly not fun, of course, it's not...
rules of Monopoly?
2 things make Monopoly not fun. It's people not knowing the rules better than their own house rules, and the fact that the game isn't meant to be fun in the first place.
Right.
2 things make it not
right.
fun.
Exactly.
Oh, you mean the game named after a financial crime isn't supposed to be fun?
The game that's supposed to be a moral lesson isn't supposed to be fun? Who'd have thought?
Well, then I'll bring up chess. So chess also is one of those...
People add their own shit house rules.
Yeah.
It's an awful game.
So if you bring up like chess, you know, as you had mentioned with the online game that with the WWE, it's you can beat somebody real quick. You can beat somebody in 4 moves in chess, and if they refuse to alter their method of playing, you're going to beat them in 4 moves every time. If they ever move to the right, it's over. So my point here is that all these games have certain roots.
Want to communicate? You can beat somebody in 2 moves in chess if they're that bad.
I don't know what to move. You're gonna have to show me.
It relies heavily on your opponent playing very badly, but yeah, it's possible. I am really good at derailing this episode, so my bad. I should just hold it off. I definitely actually come earlier, and then I was just like, hey, you were making a great point, but you said one little thing that I didn't fully agree with, so let's stop the episode.
Is it move pawn forward? They move corresponding pawn forward. Or the way around, sorry. You take pawn, but the pawn you initially move was the pawn in front of your king.
Right, the pawn in front of your king, you move your queen now in front of the directly in front, but you would have to put your king there, but the king is not in checkmate.
No, but the queen would block it, so it wouldn't work. It's not.
Yeah, king.
So the 2-move mate requires, so like if you're playing white, black, their first move would be pawn to G5. Yeah. And their next move would be pawn to F4. And then you move your bishop to H5, and it's over.
Oh, right. Yes.
But that's the 3rd move.
Really, only 2 of white's moves matter, because the only move you're actually doing is waiting for black to make the second shitty move.
Right.
Alternatively, you can do it if white does those same 2 moves, and then black can win on the second turn.
I really hope now that Legion has another board game in mind.
Yeah.
So in checkers.
So in Mousetrap, what you do is...
You can win in 2 moves in Mousetrap.
In Shoots and Ladders, what you do is... No,
in Candyland.
Shoots and Ladders. We call it Snakes and Ladders.
Yeah, Shoots and Ladders. So a lot of these early games, with the exception of the narrative games, and that's where it got kind of... It was the Wild West when it came to that stuff, because you had to like type in insert key, and if they gave you 3 keys, you had to say like the round key, and it was hard to tell with those pixels and stuff. So the tutorial system back then was basing a lot of the things that you did based on board game experience. It said this is kind of how we did it, but we always did it with other people, the co-op thing. And that's kind of what you were saying, is that some games aren't necessarily interesting of their own, but that's why, you know, games like Helldivers, that, first of all, like I said before, an action game that kind of like shows and doesn't have to tell it as much, but you do have other people who are playing with you to kind of help you through that. If you don't know, you can easily ask. They're just a voice chat away.
Because all of those like story focused games, they have you the characters communicating to you as if it's just a normal conversation, and then there's that one line where it's like, press this button to do this in-game action, and you're like, you were just talking about how the rebellion is struggling and we are in desperate need of support, and then you told me to push a button on my controller. We are not having the same conversation in those 2 sentences.
And as you tell me this in real life, and how would you even think of responding? Now put yourself in the character's shoes, being told to push in the left analog stick. I've only just learned you can do that.
And I think like games like Clue were great were instrumental in those games that we're talking about, the ones that are able to kind of integrate a tutorial with your story. Clue was amazing for that.
I think it's funny because I haven't played Clue in a very long time, and I'm pretty confident I don't remember how to actually play it correctly.
I don't think I've ever played a game of it. We have a different name for that too. Shoots and Ladders is Snakes and Ladders with us, and Clue is Cluedo.
Cluedo. Yeah. But I guess with all that being said, like I said, sometimes there was a, they had to kind of learn how to, like, what's a tutorial? How do we, like, why would we integrate a tutorial into chess? But even some of the early chess games on the computer, they would try to teach you how to play chess. And that was the point of it, how to do typing and stuff, whatnot. Maybe teaches typing, but they had like the typing of the undead and stuff, They had their little games within the thing, but they kind of
typing of the dead. God,
yeah,
right.
this is
more of actual.
Chess is the perfect example of a game where you can understand the mechanics without knowing how to play the game. Understanding the mechanics and how to play the game is a very different thing. In the same way that I know how to play Halo right now because I know what the right trigger does. I know what the right bumper does by standard on a game. But in terms of actually learning how to play the game, really, you're going to have to play the game. You're going to have to teach me about that, teach me what the enemies are, teach me what they're vulnerable to, things like that. And chess is just a primary example. If you know that the bishops move diagonally, if you know that the rook or castle moves straight, if you know that the queen moves pretty much wherever they want, you know how to play. You just don't know how to play the game yet.
Yeah, and that's a big part of a lot of these games. And there's a separate category, I would say, for games where a single player experience and a multiplayer experience are vastly different. And chess isn't quite that. Chess is always player versus player, or if you're playing against a bot, you're kind of like, it's always the same game. But if you go through a game like Pokemon, you play that single player, the game teaches you the mechanics and it kind of guides you through the story, and you play through and you find like your Pokemon that you want, you put them in your team and build them up. The experience you get from a single player playthrough of Pokemon is nothing like the multiplayer experience. The multiplayer is that same meta slave experience that you saw in other games, and it's so much more detail oriented. There are people who dig into the mathematics being done behind the scenes to figure out the exact stats you need to have to one shot the most popular counterplay, and it just becomes this almost completely different game at that point. And that's a really tough one to try and build a tutorial for, because like the whole point of the Pokemon games is that story, and then this PvP kind of split off and again almost became its own thing. It's almost a separate game at that point.
I just want to add one tiny last little tutorial detail that I love. It's just a tiny detail you find in some games, and I think it's really cute. And for a while I didn't notice it was happening. And it's when a game is initially doing the setup, introducing the character, that kind of thing, and maybe for some reason your character can't really fully move, they're just waking up, and the game will say something like, hey, look up. And then the game reads whether you tilt the stick down or you tilt the stick up to see whether you prefer inverted or normal controls. It's just a tiny little thing, but I love any game that does that. It's one of my favorite cute little moments, which every time you see it and notice it, there's just a little glow in my heart every time.
Oh, you're finally awake.
I like that. Oh, yeah.
That's what I thought of when you said that. So
The phrase that comes up all the time from the community is, well done, you completed the tutorial, now it's time for the real game. I'm like, oh, shut the fuck up. Like, every single time, I don't know why, but that absolutely like chaps my ass.
yeah.
I mean, it is kind of accurate, though.
I know, but that's the shit bit. Like, it's like I haven't even got any way to healthily vent what I feel about it and respond because it's kind of true. But it just chaps me every time.
Yeah, I think Monster Hunter, and this is just one last kind of what point I wanted to make, is Monster Hunter is that other side of the coin of those games that are a different experience with multiplayer, because Monster Hunter is very much one of those games where like the community is how you learn the game. Playing with friends and figuring out like how to fit into a team, and usually just being in a voice chat or whatever it is with other players is your mechanism to learn more about the game and like learn things you didn't even know existed, learn strategies, learn how to play the specific play style that you selected with your weapon or whatever. I think that's another kind of unique thing that was brought into gaming more recently with, you know, the internet and the way multiplayer is enabled, is that a lot of developers can kind of rely on a community to supplement their efforts to teach their players. You're also going to get those terrible people who just want to maintain certain people stuck at the very beginning if there's a PvP element to it. But cooperative games are great for educating your players on how to play the game by having more experienced players step in and say, oh yeah, here's what you're probably looking to do.
But you have to find that balance between when you're teaching someone or being taught how to play, you have to find the way that doesn't ruin the learning experience. For example, Dead by Daylight.
Tricky.
I know how to play Dead by Daylight. No, not a good example. That's a bit of a more difficult one, but Phasmophobia. I've played Phasmophobia with a few friends, probably played about 20, 25 hours. I'm not particularly great at the game, but sadly there's a whole bunch of stuff that I know you shouldn't do, even though it sounds like the right thing to do, just because I've had someone tell me while we're playing, no, actually in the systems, it's this. You shouldn't do this because actually you think this would help, but it doesn't. And it takes away a lot of the fun of that game. And you don't really remember it because you didn't learn it. You were just told it.
Yeah.
So you kind of sticks in the back of your mind a little bit, but you don't really have that learning moment and the appreciation of learning of the, oh, right. Obviously, I should light the crucifix or whatever it is in my hand. Otherwise, it's, oh, no, sorry, I should have it actively in my hand. You know, whatever it is.
You know, the crucifix that you set on fire yourself.
Obviously, I should have it in my hand actively when there's a hunt on, because that's what's going to stop it. It's not enough to just have it with you. Obviously, I've got to be more careful with the Ring of Salt. Obviously, the more I play, I realize that certain ghosts are going to chase you more around the house and not just here. But when you're just kind of told it by someone who say that, oh no, this one ghost was active after 3 minutes and not after 4, therefore it has to be a ... and it's going to be in this room. And
yeah, that's a tricky one to balance, because that is really on the type of people you play with. And there's really no way for a developer to kind of intervene in that moment and be like, let's not ruin the entire experience of the game by explaining it. But I get it. Like, this is
about your motivation.
A possibility with that. Yeah.
It's just something to keep in mind if you're ever showing someone a game that you love and you want them to love it too. Let them learn it a bit themselves.
Yep.
You wouldn't, maybe you would, but you wouldn't normally sit next to someone watching a film that you love and say, watch this bit, it's really good. I mean, maybe you would, but you
what
shouldn't.
The fuck was I doing? It is funny because there was a game series that was ruined for a friend, a game series that I loved because one of our mutual friends wanted to join us when we did his first playthrough. And our mutual friend just wouldn't shut up and would like over explain everything and take all of the learning away from my buddy. And now I don't get to play Borderlands with one of my closest friends in gaming because the first time we played any Borderlands, somebody was just like, "Oh, do this. You'll want this gun. You should choose this skill tree path." And it was just like, dude, just let him play. Like, we're all gamers. It's not like he needs to be handheld to that degree. Just let him play the game.
And most games generally are quite forgiving. Generally. There's some that aren't. Hey, souls. But generally, it doesn't really matter which skill tree path you're going to end up going down if you make some wrong choices here and there. Most games, you can get through them anyway because the developers know when they're making a game. We can't have the one path be complete shit. You know, we can't have the one be completely useless. They're not making a trap. And you might not come out of it with an optimized build. I've had very many times when playing Elden Ring or Dark Souls Online, someone will jump in and say, "No, you shouldn't build like that. What's your build, etc." And honestly, I think the least important thing in Dark Souls is your build. Generally, if you can beat a boss with a good build, you can probably beat them without it. Because you've already learned enough. It's just going to take you more hits. It's just going to be a bit more difficult, and there might be a bit less room for error.
Yeah.
A friend of ours who recently played Dark Souls 3 with their toe, singular, and completed the game one toe on one foot, which just blew me away. If someone can do that, your build actually doesn't matter all that much.
Sounds like an easy game to beat then. So there's also when you talk about Phasmophobia, that's kind of a hard one for me to comment on because it's riddled with developer issues. Because I know a lot of people who, I don't play the game personally, but I know a lot of people who only play it on the gold or platinum level, and they constantly complain about how it doesn't make sense. They're doing everything right and getting the wrong answers at the end of the day.
I think you've raised an interesting point with those types of games where there's a community element and then a difficulty setting. Because this wasn't the point you were trying to make, but this is definitely what triggered in my mind when you brought that up. Is say like a game like Helldivers, nobody's bringing in a brand new player and setting the difficulty above like 6. That's just like, that's how you ruin the experience for a new player.
I still play on 6 and it's been months.
Yeah, honestly, like this is one of my issues with Helldivers is I don't think the game is implemented in a way that they understand what they're trying to accomplish, because there is a necessity to play at higher difficulties, but the game very much feels like a silly little have fun kind of game. So when the higher difficulties are genuinely challenging and you have to be good at the game, and that's how you have to progress certain things, you can only unlock super samples above difficulty 6.
Right.
And then you use those to upgrade your ship. Now progression is locked behind skill, but the theme of the game feels very much like no, you're supposed to die. You're just out there kind of having fun with your team.
In Helldivers, you have to be at a certain level to get certain rewards, which makes sense, but there's that weird idea of now the players who are really good at the game are getting all the advantages for playing the game, so now they're more gooder, and the players who are struggling more now don't get any of the help that they might actually need to play it. And it just reminded me of the mechanic in Gears of War for the active reload. So when you're playing Gears of War, you empty your clip, and then you reload your gun. I don't know why did the sound. Then you reload your gun, and you've got on the reload bar, there's just this little timer goes across, and you've got a little window on there. And if you push the button, the bumper, in time with that reload, your gun reloads quicker. I think there might even be a little bit of extra damage, if I remember correctly, but it's a really small number. On the other hand, if you manage to get the timing wrong, now I think the reload bar just slows right down. Your gun jams for a second, you can't fight back. So there's a little bit of risk-reward in there. The thing is, you don't ever need to. You don't ever need to. You can completely play through the entire game not doing that if you're someone who's not comfortable with the idea of having that moment to use the fast reload. On the other hand, if you are someone who is good at these games and can do the fast reload, well, you get a little bit of reward, a little bit of well done, you, and the fight becomes slightly easier. but it's still always completely doable without having to engage with that. So it's a little extra mechanic if you are really good at the game, if you do have the reflexes, whatever, but you never actually have to engage with it. And I often find that with games, it can be difficult to balance that sort of risk and reward. And how do you reward a player who's playing really well? How do you reward / punish a player who's not doing very well? Because you can't punish a player who's not doing well. You can't punish a player who's struggling.
Yeah.
But can you reward them in the same way that you want to reward someone who's doing much better? But on the other hand, if we reward the players who are doing really, really well, now we're creating a gap between those who aren't doing very well and those who are. And we're making it worse. It's a bit like in real life when, let's be real, right? Look at all the people, like, think of places like YouTube, right? And think of large streamers. And think of people who get freebies in life. And you see Cristiano Ronaldo strolling in without paying to some big grand movie premiere or something. This is the last motherfucker in the world who doesn't need to pay for his damn ticket.
Exactly.
Like, this could absolutely go to someone else. So it's, where do you... to whom are you offering the rewards? How do you reward in some way a player who's really, really good at the game and make them feel like they're being really good at the game? How do you make a player who's not so good at the game feel rewarded for their participation, not punish them for not being very good at it, and give them some way to encourage them without knocking that out of balance with the people who are really good? Game design is hard.
Yeah.
And I've got not much else to add on top of that.
You did touch on what is one of my biggest pet peeves in multiplayer gaming, and is the idea of rewarding players who have done well and basically widening the gap between them and the players who didn't have the ability to do well. So if you give your players a reward for being good in a specific instance, and it's, say in Destiny 2, it's a gun that you can only get in this brief time window, and you give it to the players who achieved whatever it was in that time window, and then it's never available again. I don't think this actually happened in Destiny, but just as an example. And that gun is really, really good. So now moving forward, you have another similar challenge like that. You have this time window where players need to accomplish something, and the players from the original who got that really good gun now have an advantage to complete this new challenge where they'll get another reward. That is terrible game design. Your rewards should never punish players who joined the game more recently or can't invest the amount of time to just develop to the level of your top tier players. And it's just one of the things that frustrates the hell out of me. And it's huge in gacha gaming because it is very much like if you spend money on this game, you get rewarded. And if you spend money on this game early, then you'll get rewarded moving down the road because you'll have better options available to you for those time sensitive challenges. It's just the one thing, one of the few points on game design that I'm gonna make a like sincere stance on. Don't build your games in a way that widens the gap between good players and players who can't get good, they don't have the time to invest in the game, players who don't want to spend money on the game, players who are treating this casually. Don't deny them options that you give to your players who have managed to achieve something that then makes it harder for them to continue playing the game.
I wanted to just add on, by the way, because I've just realized I forgot something with the Gears of War mechanic, and it was just coming up when I was reading it now. I knew there was something else in it, and I was just trying to find that last detail. So there was a second hidden mechanic that the game never actually addressed, and it was designed in with those players in mind who probably weren't quite so good. They weren't going to do the active reload. The designers assumed that these people would reload less often, because if you know there's an active reload, and you know I can quickly get my gun back up to full ammo really, really quickly whenever I want. You've got 2 seconds in combat, you're probably just going to go, okay, let's go, bap, bap. On the other hand, the player who's not quite so sure and that reload's going to take 3 or 4 seconds, they might not want to, so they're just kind of spraying and praying, and they're going to be doing a reload from empty more often. So they added in a small little hidden secret mechanic, which was the last bullet in your clip does more damage than any other bullet. And it was never something that was actually mentioned. And it's just the idea is those people who are really good at the game, they're probably never going to fire that last bullet because they're constantly going to be reloading. But the people who are a bit less experienced, they're probably going to actually be reloading from empty really often. And how often in a game is that last bullet? You're just hoping that it takes down enemies. So they're going to end up with more of those moments where their last bullet just on empty took out the enemy that was running for them.
Yeah.
So it's a cute little way of balancing that out. And they never draw attention to it. They just let the player think that they're having that moment in the same way that Uncharted always lets you dodge the first bullet.
Just well done on the developers of Gears of War, because I feel like that is such a gentle way to shrink that gap again.
Yeah.
Especially in a game where there's not PvP and that gap doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Good on you.
All you want in your 2-player Gears of War, if you're running a co-op campaign, is for both players to feel like they're contributing. That's really it. You don't need much more. In terms of the gameplay, what you really want is the time with your friend. But in terms of the gameplay, you just want to feel like you did your bit. So when that last extra damage bullet that you didn't know about does take down that enemy just at that crucial moment, they gave you that. So well done them.
Yeah, I agree.
If there are any gameplay mechanics and tutorials that you thought maybe we should have covered, go ahead and put it in the comments. Like the video. We're still looking for subs. Growing every day, that's for sure. Comments definitely help the algorithm, so we would appreciate those. But we will see you next time. Thank you, AMKomnenos, BananaHammockRepublic, and myself, Legion. Till next time. Bye-bye.